Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, MSCI's index for emerging market stocks scaled a fresh three-week high today as we saw Hong Kong stocks led a rally in emerging market shares. Now, on the continent, some profit taking in Egypt as the EGX 30 fell over 1% today, halting a week of massive gain. South Africa's JSE was firmer in line with Asian stocks. Industrials climbed 1.14%, while we saw gold miners down about 4.23% on the day. Now, also coming up on the show, MTN shuts its stores in Nigeria as retaliatory violence follows xenophobic attacks. The 28th edition of the World Economic Forum on Africa opens in Cape Town. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in new Brexit battle after his no-deal bill was defeated. Now, South African businesses outside of the country are on high alert as they become targets of retaliatory attacks in some African nations. This follows xenophobic attacks on foreign-owned businesses in South Africa. The Nigerian division of MTN shut all its stores and service centers after its facilities in 3 cities were attacked. Now, grocer ShopRite said that several stores in South Africa, Nigeria and Zambia were closed and extensive damage had been done to several supermarkets. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has said that he is committed to quelling those attacks on foreigners. Now, in the affected areas in South Africa, businesses in the Jeppestown area are mostly still closed. Many shops and businesses have been broken into, looted and then set alight. Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola spoke to 2 business owners there.
The mobs that attacked businesses in and around Johannesburg didn't discriminate between local and foreign businesses. Everything was fair game. Paul D, a Cote d'Ivoire businessman, was on the receiving end of the violence.
At that night, I was here. I was speaking to the police. Please, I need your assistance. Could you please call the fire station? They said the situation is out of control.
And across the road, South African business owner Yusuf Salaji suffered a similar fate. He lost an estimated $200,000 worth of stock.
You know, to be honest, at my age, I don't think I'm going to recover than what I've lost. Because it took me 38 years to build up this. Honest living takes long to come up. And probably my children will but I'm not coming back to this place because 6 months down the line, we're going to have again problems. And I'm not going to go through this again.
The situation in terms of insurance and compensation will be complicated. It's unclear whether government can be held responsible for arson, theft and looting.
I just want to close the whole building and wait what is going to happen. If the government is going to compensate us, I've got no idea. But for the moment, I don't know what to do, really.
I'm not insured because according to my faith, I'm a strong believer. Everything I leave in my Almighty's hands. He put me into it, he'll take me out of it.
For some people, this is the end of the road. For others, they're trying to make a living by stripping down cars and selling those parts on. Whatever happens here, it'll never be the same. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Jeppestown, South Africa.
Well, let's get the latest on the growing tension around Africa after those xenophobic attacks. We're joined now by Sumitra Naidu in Cape Town, and in Abuja, Nigeria, Phil Ihaza now joins us. Great to have you both on the show. Now, Sumitra, I'll start with you. The violence did continue into yesterday in Johannesburg's Alexandria Township, or rather into Tuesday. Has the tension abated in Johannesburg and the surrounding areas today?
Well, Uche, it does seem like that it is quieter today. We heard of no reports of violence. Of course, security has been beefed up in those areas, in the problem areas. There were quite a few areas around the Johannesburg city centre, also in Pretoria, that were affected in recent days. So we haven't heard anything today, but we did hear about retaliatory attacks in Nigeria and Zambia, the ShopRite being targeted in ShopRite stores being targeted in those countries, Pick and Pay as well. We saw some footage making the rounds on social media of a Pick and Pay where people were storming, trying to get into the store. Of course, in the Johannesburg area, most of the shops that have been damaged and looted and some of them burnt all remain closed, and of course security remains in that area, but we haven't heard any reports. Today in Cape Town there were some demonstrations, but that was around gender-based violence, and they were really looking for an ear from the president for him to address them. Unfortunately, he wasn't here today. He was at a nearby hotel and he did speak there, and he did condemn the attacks, but it is quiet for now. Uche?
Right. Thanks, Sumitra, for that update. Well, Phil, these attacks did trigger violence and, of course, massive looting of South African-owned brands in Nigeria. We saw firms like MTN and ShopRite closing their doors. Have authorities in Nigeria managed to gain control of the situation?
Well, thank you, Uche. As we speak, we can say that, yes, indeed, authorities have been able to gain control of the situation. But as a Tuesday night into a Wednesday morning, you know that Nigeria is a very, very large country with several states. So there's 6 states and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. And but then, even as at that, with the fact that Nigeria is vast, security operatives were able to beef up security in several outlets belonging to South Africans in Nigeria, like ShopRite, MTN, DSTV offices, and a host of others. But that didn't stop some other outlets being attacked by angry Nigerians. One in Abuja, for example, and Oyo State, and of course in Lagos State. But so far, security agents have been able to gain control of the crisis, and the Nigerian government has come out openly to condemn those attacks, those retaliatory attacks by Nigerians, saying that that is not the way to go, and they are already dealing with the matter at their level, dialoguing and insisting that South African government provide, a solution, a lasting solution to end these xenophobic attacks on foreign nationals, especially Nigeria.
Now, Sumitra, as Phil said there, the country is facing quite a lot of backlash and criticism for these attacks, even as it hosts the continent's biggest business and political event with many leaders at the World Economic Forum. How much of an impact is this having on the meeting, and how is the government handling what is now a diplomatic nightmare?
So, Uche, we haven't heard anything official, especially when it comes to, some of the countries that have, the leaders of some of the African countries that have decided not to actually attend the World Economic Forum this year. When you speak to WEF organizers, they say that some of these presidents cancelled before the attacks started. We only heard from Nigeria. They were calling for sanctions, and they did send a diplomat to come and meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa to discuss the attacks. But other than that, we're not hearing too much in terms of, what exactly is going on behind the scenes. We do know that some meetings have been set up, but we're really not seeing the kind of attendance that we've seen in previous years at a World Economic Forum. The plenary sessions are fairly quiet, and we're also not seeing enough South African diplomats here. We're not seeing anybody from government. President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke here in Cape Town today, but not at the World Economic Forum. He spoke at a nearby hotel. He did condemn the attacks, and he addressed investors in relation to WEF, but he wasn't here at the forum that's taking place at the moment. So very disappointing, a lot of criticism, as you say. So people won't say it officially, but there is, people feel that the response from the South African government has been extremely poor, especially since this is not the first time that we've seen a rise of xenophobic attacks in the country. So, some leaders, behind the scenes are calling for the president to take more action, to do more to quell these attacks, to stop it from happening again. but we're not seeing that kind of response. In terms of how they're dealing with it and the damage control, we're really not seeing that much coming through from the government at this stage. So it's really disappointing. There was a press conference this afternoon as well. We're expecting to see some South African government officials there. There was a no-show from any of the officials, except from somebody from South African big business. People feel very disappointed, and we're really not seeing the kind of traction that we usually see at the World Economic Forums. Uche?
Well, Phil, as Sumitra alluded to there, Nigeria did decide to pull out of the World Economic Forum. It also recalled its ambassador to South Africa. Is this confirmed yet? What exactly is the government, Nigeria's government, doing about what's going on in South Africa right now?
Okay, well, so for the fact that Nigeria has decided to boycott the World Economic Forum, yes, that's confirmed. The spokesperson to the presidency, Bashir Ahmad, actually made that clarification earlier in the day, saying that yes, Nigeria has decided to boycott that World Economic Forum holding in South Africa, but it doesn't stop some Nigerians, including the former minister, from attending, but that they're doing that on their own. However, Nigerian government has been in several talks with the South African government, also making statements demanding and insisting for South African government to step in and end the crisis in South Africa. For example, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, has just recently stated that the country has drawn a red line with South Africa as regards this crisis. He's demanding for compensation, insisting that South African government compensate all the victims that are involved in this attack. He says that at least 50 vehicles were destroyed, burned or vandalized, several shops and properties worth millions of dollars destroyed, and he's insisting that there must be compensation of some sort. He's also saying that there has to be proper detail given as regards security provision for Nigerians in South Africa, if it means Nigeria sending the extra security to form some sort of alliance with South African security operatives to end the crisis. He's also said that the Nigerian government has also recalled its ambassador to South Africa, but that would only occur after the special envoy that the government sent to South Africa returns with its report, hopefully before the end of the week.
Right. Well, many thanks to both of you for those insightful updates. That's Sumitra Naidu in Cape Town, and of course, Phili Ihaza joining us there in Abuja. Well, let's move on now. Sudan is pushing to be officially removed from the United States list of countries sponsoring terrorism. This comes days after new Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok took charge of the country's civilian military transitional government. Now, the government met with the U.S. representatives, insisting the blacklist was hampering the country's economic revival by discouraging foreign investments.
We made negotiations with the Americans, and we expect there would be progress on removing Sudan from the terrorism list, since we believe that the situation is suitable for such a decision, and we believe we will make significant progress in this issue.
We will be supporting Sudan, as I have announced, and have informed the Prime Minister that we are now increasing the humanitarian aid to the country for this year for 5 million euros to a total of 15 million euros. On their end, the new Sudanese government must make its own efforts, and I am sure that this can be discussed very promptly on an international level. Whether this leads to the United States taking Sudan off the list of the state's sponsor of terrorism essentially depends on how developments and reforms in Sudan take place in the upcoming weeks and months.
Well, now let's take a look at some of our corporate headlines for the day. Work on a pipeline to export Ugandan oil has been suspended. This is after Tullow Oil's plan to sell another stake in the project to France's Total and China's CNOOC was called off last week. The All East African Crude Oil Pipeline, or the EACOP activities, including tenders, have been suspended until further notice because of this collapsed deal. And a South African court has ordered the release of an Airbus aircraft which was leased by Tanzania's national airline that was impounded as part of a compensation dispute. The A220-300 plane was impounded last month following a court application by a retired farmer who has claimed compensation from the Tanzanian government over the expropriation of his land. And South Africa's cash-strapped power utility Eskom could be forced to shut down some of its plants if it fails to reduce emissions. This raises the specter of further blackouts. The potential closures could cut a tenth of the state firm's 45,000 megawatt production capacity and piles pressure on the government that has had to bail out the debt-ridden firm. And Walmart says it will discontinue in Ohio. Now, the largest U.S. arms retailer, which has been under pressure to change its policies on gun sales, also said it will discontinue hand. The 8th edition of the World Economic Forum for Africa opens in Cape Town. And Ethiopian Airlines to boost flights between African countries and Chinese cities.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an end.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this. Now, delegates from across Africa have gathered in South Africa for the annual World Economic Forum. However, a number of African leaders have pulled out at the last minute in retaliation to the recent xenophobic attacks which are spreading across the country. CGTN Sumitra Naidu with more.
It hasn't been easy for President Ramaphosa. Since taking office in 2018, he's faced battle after battle, but he's sticking to his plan, determined to fix the economy.
The reality is that our economy is barely growing to address the challenges that our country faces. And while the economy is creating new jobs, the jobs that are being created are not nearly enough to bring down the overall rate of unemployment. We do need to do much more to increase the level of job creation in our country.
But the president now has to deal with some abuses that have worsened over the years. Corruption, violence against women and xenophobia. Protesters came to the WEF gathering hoping to get his attention. Speaking at a breakfast meeting, Ramaphosa reaffirmed South Africa's position as a viable investment destination.
We are actively engaging with a number of role players in our economy. Organized business is being engaged, labor is being engaged, and indeed, including community organizations as well, are also being engaged. And we are doing this so that we can improve the indicators that everybody keeps talking about, like, for instance, the ease of starting a business, property registration, taxation, and a number of other issues.
The South African economy grew 3.1% in the second quarter of 2019, a massive improvement from the first quarter's contraction of 3.2%. A firm recovery in the mining sector, up 14.4%, was behind the gain.
We have moved to clear up uncertainty in the policy space with the finalization, as you all know, with the mining charter and the release of the policy directive for the release of high demand spectrum. Work on a draft oil and gas bill to guide the development of these burgeoning economic sectors is at an advanced stage, and the integrated resource plan, which will deal with our energy architecture, that will outline the trajectory of our energy future is also close to being finalized.
It was another impassioned plea by the president calling on investors to help revive the South African economy. Unfortunately, it seems like he's talking to the wrong people. South Africans are in need of strong, decisive leadership right now. African leaders, even here at WEF, are urging the president to restore order in the country, stop the attacks and get people working again. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, the main focus of the World Economic Forum on Africa is transforming continental institutions, attracting investment, integrating countries and regions, and stimulating innovation. Now, the conversations are looking at key industries, building on the launch of the first African Affiliate Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in South Africa. Here's Angelo Coppola with more.
Many believe that African countries aren't ready for the fourth industrial revolution, but the revolution isn't happening all in one go.
There's a lot of work that needs to happen. It's really a progression. It's not an event that we're all now ready to embrace new technology, but there are pockets of where you can see excellence, like in this institution here, in this partnership with IBM. It's making a lot of sense to showcase that the future, the world really has changed in how we do business. You can see in how we conduct business.
This is a continuum. It is built on other technologies that actually preceded it. So the advances in computing, the advances in artificial intelligence and big data and many others have come together to be called, just by using a generic term, called the fourth industrial revolution that the World Economic Forum obviously in a way came up with.
The technology is already upon us, so the question about the fourth industrial revolution that needs to be answered is a little more practical. What problems do we want to solve? Financial inclusion is perhaps the most pressing.
We have over 30 million small shops across the continent, and at the moment a lot of them are unbanked. The reason that they're unbanked is because nobody knows about them, but the data exists on their mobile phone through their daily transaction. But it's very difficult to go ahead and understand that complex and unstructured data. Now, if we are smart enough to utilize artificial intelligence, all of a sudden we understand about their daily turnovers, and we can check and understand their creditworthiness, which means that the banks will be willing to give them small financing on a daily basis.
The fourth industrial revolution is a great term, but it actually can translate into physical, actionable programs which are going to benefit every single country on the continent. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, as the World Economic Forum mulls over Africa's fourth industrial revolution, the continent's largest economy, Nigeria, is still struggling to diversify beyond a dependence on crude oil earnings. In the textile industry, for instance, the country relies heavily on imported fabrics since the local supply is insufficient. Well, correspondent Phil Ihaza in Abuja delves further into this.
This market on the outskirts of Abuja is famous for sales of used clothes and imported fabrics. Nigeria is the largest market in Africa for second-hand clothes, known as Okrika. Over $4 billion worth is imported annually.
Why some people prefer these Okrikas is that some used to last than that of new one, and secondly, they are more affordable than that of showdown.
Used clothes is for everybody. People come from bank, people come from government offices, because it's affordable and it's for cheaper rates.
Nigeria has a population of nearly 200 million people, but almost half are currently classified as living in extreme poverty. Economists say a dependence on oil, the country's main earner since the 1980s, has distracted the government from reviving its local textile industry.
When the leadership turned its focus from other sectors to petroleum, and then every other thing went south, because oil for us is quick, and then all we needed to do was just extract and export, and then we sell in foreign markets. So leadership, focus on oil, and then the fact that we've had our infrastructure decay over the past 50 years has put us where we are today.
However, the government has been making efforts to diversify its economy away from oil and boost its manufacturing capacity. Starting from January 2020, the Central Bank of Nigeria will restrict textile traders' access to foreign exchange, aiming to force them to source all their cotton needs locally. Analysts say in order for Nigeria to remain the largest economy on the continent, it will have to also provide adequate infrastructure for local manufacturers and start adapting to the digital age.
The government need to, first of all, look at solving the power problems we have in the country, even if it means deploying small-scale power solutions across the country to feed cottage industries. We have a huge youth population. Some of them are using their technical knowledge, to do negative things. We can tap into that space, train them on digitization, and then use it to scale up our industrial capacity.
The hope is that this year's World Economic Forum in South Africa will help Nigeria's manufacturing sector find ways to make the most of those digital skills.
Experts say digital technology could make local manufacturing in Nigeria, like the textile industry, more efficient and boost profits, create business opportunities and jobs. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Now, a lack of skills is a major concern across many African economies. A survey by PwC released at the World Economic Forum indicates that despite CEOs taking a wait-and-see approach on managing machine learning and artificial intelligence, more than three-quarters of them want government to incentivize the retraining of workers. While in Cape Town, CGTN's Ramanyang explored the business opportunities presented by teaching a broad range of coding skills. He did this with the CEO of Moringa School.
In terms of the level of skills, so I think, an example I usually give is when we talk about data science. Right? So in the West, there are many companies that actually have big data. And the ironic part is that, a lot of people are talking about data science locally, but really what they're looking for are data engineers, data analysts, right? So people who can just take a relatively small to medium data set and make sense of it. And so instead of kind of jumping straight to big data, talking about AI, machine learning, et cetera, it starts with the employers instead of, thinking about all this hype on, we should launch a AI course or IoT course if there isn't demand for it. And so for us, it's really about where are the jobs and how do we build the skills for those jobs, but how do we also encourage the local government and also public sector to invest more in job creation.
The financial guys, the financial sector guys, banks in particular, insurance, probably somewhere in the mix as well, they've been pretty much properly appraised individuals or businesses what to do with it.
A lot of employers will put out a job description, even big banks or telecoms, et cetera. They'll put out a certain job description asking for certain levels of skills. And it's either one, unrealistic, that you can't find that in the local market, or you need to invest in someone more junior to build it up, or two, a lot of times they weren't sure what they're looking for. And so a lot of our work at Moringa School is to make sure that when we interface with employers, we're actually supporting them to help them understand what kind of teams should you be building out as you're trying to scale.
Do you run into this barrier where employers are like, yeah, but this person must have a degree in X and Y and Z, and yet for a lot of the skills that we're talking about, learning how to code, for example, in Python, these are things that if you have a decent internet connection and the time, you can learn on your own. It doesn't necessarily have to come through an accredited facility. Do you still run into barriers of that sort, where there's a sort of culture clash, if I may call it that, between what employers are expecting and what the market is like at the moment?
Absolutely, yeah. That happens in Kenya, happens in Rwanda, and in other markets that we're expanding into. And so I think the thing that we also need to do is manage perception and expectation setting. And so when we actually talk to employers, again, it's saying, here's realistically in a 5-month full-time intensive program, what you can expect young people to come out with. Right, but the training and the development doesn't end there. And so when our alumni actually work for employers, we do a lot of work to make sure that they can also continue to upskill themselves. Because if they don't have those opportunities, then they'll stay at a junior level. And what we know from the skill space is that employers actually need more senior and mid-level talent, right? But that talent starts somewhere. And so just really resetting expectations with employers so they understand, you can't expect a senior level developer in 5-6 months, right? In no world is that possible, whether you're in the US or you're in Kenya. And so just really helping them understand, this is what you should expect, and this is how you should buffer yourself so you have the right type of mix of talent between senior and junior.
What's your transition rate like for the students who go through your coding school?
So currently, 85% of our graduates move into full-time jobs after Moringa School. And so the way that we do that is part of our program has a very practical element to it, where employers like I&M Bank, other employers will come in and actually give them projects during the program. And so by the time they graduate, these employers already see, oh wow, you can actually do what you say you do, and a lot of them pipeline into jobs that way.
And of course, the World Economic Forum enters its second day tomorrow, and CGTN's Ramanyang will continue to bring us more on the discussions taking place there. You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, still to come. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in Brexit battle after his no-deal bill was defeated. And we look at how digital platforms are offering Venezuelans a lifeline in Colombia.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Here's a recap of other headlines at this hour. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the country is committed to stopping attacks on foreign nationals. Now, the latest xenophobic attacks have threatened to cloud the ongoing World Africa Economic Forum, which is aimed at boosting intra-African trade. Authorities in the country have so far arrested almost 300 people. And UNICEF's representative in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Edouard Beigbeder, has toured a number of places worst hit by the current Ebola outbreak. More than 2,000 people have died from the disease in the past 13 months. Beigbeder's delegation visited Ituri province, Komanda, Mambasa, and Mangina, where UNICEF has set up a nursery to care for children affected by the outbreak. And aid agencies in South Sudan are calling on the international community to support the voluntary return of internally displaced people if conditions are safe and dignified. They want more to be done to help people, particularly women, caught in the endless cycle of movement. Well, Oxfam says that armed clashes between parties have reduced since the signing of the revitalized peace deal. However, many internally displaced women were concerned that returning to their homes could subject them to violence, including sexual assault. And the special representative of President Xi Jinping and a member of the political bureau of the CPC Central Committee, Yang Jiechi, has met with the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta in the capital, Nairobi. Yang said China is committed to partnering with Kenya through the Belt and Road Initiative and the China-Africa Cooperation Forum. He said BRI and FOCAC aligned infrastructure projects which are aimed at fostering intra-Africa commerce as well as inter-regional trade between Africa and Asia. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Well, on the international front, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will seek to trigger a general election on October 15th, and that's if Labour and rebel Tories succeed in blocking a no-deal Brexit. Johnson needs the support of 2/3 of Parliament to trigger an election. However, the opposition Labour Party says it won't back a poll until a delay to the 31 October Brexit deadline is set.
The consequences of this vote tonight, it means that Parliament is on the brink of wrecking any deal that we might be able to strike in Brussels, because tomorrow's bill would hand control of the negotiations to the EU, and that would mean more dither, more delay and more confusion, and it would mean that the EU themselves would be able to decide how long to keep this country in the EU. And since I refuse to go along with that plan, we are going to have to make a choice, Mr. Speaker. I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. I don't believe the right honourable gentleman wants an election. But if the House votes for this bill tomorrow, the public will have to choose who goes to Brussels on October the 17th to sort this out and take this country forward.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I welcome tonight's vote. We live in a parliamentary democracy. We do not have a presidency, but a Prime Minister. Prime Ministers govern with the consent of the House of Commons, representing the people in whom the sovereignty rests. There is no consent. There is no consent in this House to leave the European Union without a deal.
Well, let's get the latest on that Brexit showdown. We're joined by Naweed Jabarkil, who's joining us at Westminster. Welcome to the show, Naweed. Now, two very big issues tabled at Parliament today. Let's start with the bill requesting a further delay if there's no deal by 19th October. Have we seen MPs reach a decision yet?
Well, Uche, as we speak, they're currently voting on that very bill. It passed its first round of voting by 329 to 300, which was a higher majority for the opposition than they won last night in the bid to wrest control of the agenda of Parliament today. What they're doing now is they're voting on amendments that the Speaker's allowed to that very bill. We understand there are 23 amendments and 4 new clauses which have been put into the bill, and some of those will be voted on. So we're expecting a long night here in Parliament in Westminster. But essentially what the bill is trying to do is to force the Prime Minister to go to the European Union and seek an extension to the Brexit deadline. It's currently, as you say, October 31st. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised to take Britain out of the European Union with or without a deal. No ifs or buts, he famously said. Well, that looks increasingly unlikely now because this bill has passed its first round. The second one, we're expecting the results sometime within the next hour, and Boris Johnson has already said that if that happens, then he's going to try and push for a general election. Uche?
Well, let's delve a little further into this no-deal bill. It's all about blocking the most extreme form of Brexit, but how exactly will that work, Naweed?
Well, there are two essential parts of this. First of all is the extension itself, which looks at the October 31st deadline. The bill wants that to be pushed to January 31st, 2020. Essentially, that's 3 more months for time for negotiations with the European Union to try and push through, to try and find a way for Britain to leave the EU. Remember, the backstop is still the key issue that's preventing both sides from reaching an agreement. That's one aspect of it. And really what Boris Johnson is saying is that if this is approved, then that's going to tie his hands in negotiations with Brussels. He says that if no deal is taken off the table, then the Europeans are less likely to give him favourable terms when they meet. And in terms of dates looking forward, one date that Boris Johnson has put forward for a general election is October 15th. That's what he said in Parliament a short while ago. That's the date that he wants. October 17th is when the key European Union summit is, when the UK will go back to Europe, back to Brussels, and try and secure essentially a final agreement with the European Union. That looks increasingly unlikely today, given what's happening here in Westminster.
Quite right. And as you said, Johnson did say he'll be pushing for an immediate vote on an early general election if the Brexit delay bill is passed, which looks more likely now. Does he have the backing of at least 2/3 of members of Parliament?
Well, that's the key question here, and in short, at the moment, that seems like a very, very tall order. 2/3 of parliamentarians, that's 650 lawmakers in total. He'll need about 434 of them to back his calls. We know that after yesterday, he doesn't have a majority in Parliament anymore, so essentially he's going to have to rely on the opposition to get his general election. It's almost a weird twist of irony, if you will. What have the opposition said? Well, Jeremy Corbyn has said that his party will back the calls, will heed the calls for a general election only once this bill is passed through, this no-deal Brexit. So they want no-deal Brexit off the table, and that's when they're willing to back a general election. But even at this stage, there are voices within the Labour Party who say, well, hang on, we've got Boris Johnson with his back up against the wall here. Why on earth would we want to give him a general election? We heard from Tony Blair, the former leader of the Labour Party, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who said, let's not fall into this elephant trap. So there's still some unanswered questions about whether the opposition would back a general election. If the no-deal bill, which is currently being voted on in Parliament, goes through,
Mm.
we're expecting that sometime early next week to come into law for the Queen to sign it off. That's when all the tension will be on, all the questions will be surrounding whether an election, whether the opposition will back an election, and whether Mr. Johnson can take this question to the public and try and seek a mandate for a no-deal Brexit or for a Brexit deal by October 31st.
Well, that's a huge question because Johnson actually went through with his decision to expel about 21 Tory MPs for defying the party whip on a Tuesday in that failed vote. What impact, now, do you think this will have on the party?
Yeah, I think this is a really important issue because a lot of the debate here has been government versus parliament. But if you look at the Conservative Party, this is an intra-party issue as well. And some of the names who rebelled against Mr. Johnson in that vote last night, 21 of them in total. Let me just give you a sense of who they include. The former finance minister, just until 6 weeks ago, Philip Hammond. He's been a member of the Conservative Party for 45 years. He joined when he was 18. He's now 53. He's essentially been told he's no longer welcome in the party. Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill. I mean, for most people, Winston Churchill is synonymous with the Conservative Party. He said that he's not going to run for re-election the next time there is a general election. Kenneth Clarke, another name that's really well regarded among political circles here in the United Kingdom. His nickname is the Father of the House, he's essentially known as, given that he's the longest serving Conservative MP here in Westminster. So really, Boris Johnson's decision, the government's decision to suspend these people temporarily from the party hasn't really gone down very well. And the really key thing to remember here, Uche, is that this is an issue, Europe is an issue that's plagued the Conservative Party for a number of decades now. The last 4 prime ministers that the Conservatives have put into Downing Street, that includes Margaret Thatcher, John Major, David Cameron, who called the referendum on Europe, and his successor, Theresa May. All 4 of them have been undone, partly, some would say mainly, because of their stance on Europe. And the sense here is that Boris Johnson could be the 5th name added to that list, which would make him the shortest serving Prime Minister in British history.
Wow, well, we're certainly watching. Many thanks for that update, Naweed. Of course, that was Naweed Jabbar-Kil. He's joining us there in Westminster. Well, let's move on now. In a crisis-stricken Venezuela, more than 1 million people have fled the country's hyperinflation to look for jobs in neighboring Colombia. For these newcomers, digital platforms offering freelance opportunities are now a lifeline. Well, from the Colombian capital of Bogota, here's our correspondent, Michelle Bege.
Every day, 29-year-old Sofia Guerrero gets on her bike and pedals through all kinds of obstacles to make a living.
We battle thirst, rain, heat, hunger, all types of difficulties, even going to the bathroom. But we continue.
Guerrero is a sort of freelance personal shopper. She works for the Colombian mobile app called Rappi, which promises a fast and prompt delivery of anything and everything for its users. Guerrero is accompanied by her husband, Andre Garcia. As Venezuelan migrants living in Bogota, finding work was difficult. Digital platforms that offer freelance work like Rappi, DoorDash, and Uber became their best option for making money.
It is an independent job. You don't have to answer to a boss. You are your own employer. And it is a company with a presence in many countries of Latin America.
The job isn't at all easy. Guerrero works from 8 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., Monday through Monday. The company pays her according to the distance traveled. She says she can earn anything from $4 to up to $12 a day, depending on the demand. Competition has become fierce.
There are many Venezuelans. There are so many Rappi workers. There just isn't enough work anymore. There can be 100 requests for deliveries, but there are thousands of Rappi.
Rappi has come under criticism most recently because of the shortcomings of working in the so-called gig economy. Entertainers sometimes refer to their performances as gigs. The word has become a slang term referring to almost any short-term freelance work. In the gig economy, freelancers get fast cash. Employers save cash because they don't have to pay employee health benefits. And for Sofia, this job means less harassment. When she first arrived 3 years ago, she began working as a manager at a bar where men made assumptions about female refugees.
I came here to work, never to sell myself. I won't do it no matter how difficult things get. Everyone has the right to do with their bodies as they please, but let's not judge everyone the same, because not all of us prostitute ourselves.
Her strength to keep going is her 12-year-old daughter, who is still back at home. Sofia hasn't seen her in almost 2 years.
She recently graduated, and I wanted to be there, but I couldn't. She asked me to bring her, but I'm not yet stable here for her to come live with me.
Colombian lawmakers continue to look for ways to regulate the tech industry to protect workers and customers. But time means money, and these migrant workers don't have the time or the money to wait. They just have to keep pedaling. Michelle Vega, CGTN, Bogota.
And on that note, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices recovering ground, with Brent crude climbing almost 4%, back to over $60 per barrel. Now, they were boosted by a wider market pickup on positive news from China's services sector after 3 days of losses on fears about a weakening global economy. Meanwhile, gold prices dipped today as investors booked profits after a 1% jump in the previous session. And of course, as political risks in Europe and Asia receded, but of course concerns over the global economy and the China-US trade war kept bullion close to a 6-year peak. Well, we're heading into a quick break now, still to come on the show. We look at the microbiologist in Côte d'Ivoire who is breeding earthworms for fertilizer.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, Ethiopian Airlines plans to boost flights between its African hubs and Chinese cities. The carrier will increase its weekly flights from Addis Ababa to above 50 from the current 35. The move has been triggered by the booming trade and investment relations between China and the continent. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Flights will be added to the already existing routes such as Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu and Hong Kong. Chongqing is part of Ethiopian Airlines' new destinations in China.
Our aspirations are we want to have 52 passenger flights a week. That means we are going to make our Guangzhou flights from 10 per week to twice daily. We want also to fly to the new airport in Beijing. As you know, Beijing has seen now a very large airport, second airport next to the capital, in addition to the capital airport. So we have applied to fly a daily flight, additional daily flight to the new airport. So it will be daily to Beijing capital and daily to the new airport.
Ethiopian Airlines is now the largest and the only airliner that is successfully carrying passengers and cargo with daily flights from Addis Ababa Bole International Airport to several Chinese destinations and vice versa.
As you know, when we bring passengers and cargo from China, or we take passengers and cargo to China from Africa, we're talking about 60 destinations on this side of the world, which is the African side. So we are also deepening and expanding in the African continent. We, as you know, we have not coverage. We do not have coverage in Northern Africa, but today, due to the significant Chinese investment in Algeria, we are seriously studying Algeria to connect Algeria with China. Same with Morocco.
ET prides itself for playing a key role in connecting people of Africa to the other side of the world throughout history.
We can confidently say that we have also played a key role in showing the African population, the African people, the other side of the world, because, as you know, historically, Africa was connected with Europe because of historical background of colonization. So the trade lane was north-south with Europe. And as a continent, Europe still remains to be the largest partner. But in a per country measurement, China is today the largest trading partner of Africa. So Ethiopian Airlines can confidently say that it has played a key role in this development.
Member of Star Alliance, Ethiopian has been flying to China since the early 1970s. It's one of the 4 senior foreign airlines of the world which were connecting China with the rest of the world. Fast forward 50 plus years, and when China is now the second largest economy and a superpower too, ET remains an ally stronger than ever before. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's now turn our attention to Côte d'Ivoire, where Romeo Du, who is a young microbiologist entrepreneur, has set up a private company called Microfertile. Now, Microfertile specializes in the breeding of earthworms. This farming allows him today to produce a 100% organic fertilizer, which is used by many farmers in the country. It is a rare initiative in the West African sub-region. Here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala with his story.
In Côte d'Ivoire's Bingaville, a village in the country's capital, Abidjan, Romeo Du collects earthworms. Once collected, these small creatures are then used for vermiculture. This atypical breeding activity could scare some, but yet it allows this young microbiologist to earn a lot of money.
A ton of worms is selling today at $106,000. I do not complain and I live comfortably thanks to earthworms. However, I believe that other young people can do the same. We just need to be able to guide them and provide the frameworks so that it can be done properly.
According to Du, one earthworm reproduces about 500 others. To increase the reproduction of worms, he feeds them with compost made from cocoa and coffee residue, as well as other agricultural waste. For the young microbiologist, breeding earthworms offers solutions to a couple of problems.
I'm sure earthworms are a solution to these problems because vermiculture allows us to both create jobs but also clean up our environment. This fertilizer is a natural product that follows its normal course in the plantation. It can enrich the plants for 6 months, which means that in one application, the farmer will continue to harvest for 6 months. Our fertilizers help to regenerate the entire microorganic environment around the plant, and this is the special feature of the microfertile fertilizers.
Romeo sells his 100% natural fertilizers at low prices. His customers are mainly small-scale farmers, most of them unable to obtain chemical fertilizers that are often very expensive for them. Since 2009, Romeo has trained nearly 300 young people who are now making a living from vermiculture.
When I met Mr. Do Romeo, I was a computer scientist. He taught me vermicomposting, which fascinated me, and I gave up on IT for this job. Today, I do not regret my choice because I'm doing very well. As you can see, I'm collecting worms to make another worm breeding site.
Du's fertilizers are gaining popularity by the day.
Before I used other products that did not always work as I wanted, but since I discovered earthworm fertilizer, I'm really satisfied. Compared to other fertilizers, the results with earthworm fertilizers are far beyond our expectations. My brothers can attest to this.
In addition to producing organic fertilizer, breeding earthworms also allows the treatment of wastewater, recycling of household waste, as well as provides animal nutrition, aspects that Microfertile intends to explore in the future. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, just before we go, here's a quick update on that Brexit showdown. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has lost the vote again, essentially meaning that he must pursue a deal on Brexit. Now, he lost by about 327 to 299. The PM will now seek an extension of the Brexit deadline and renew negotiations with the EU. Let's listen.
I believe that they will. Then, under any circumstances, this country will leave the EU on October the 31st. Mr. Speaker, it is completely impossible for government to function if the House of Commons refuses to pass anything that the government proposes. And in my view, and the view of this government, there must now be an election on Tuesday the 15th of October, and I invite the right honourable gentleman to respond, to decide which of us goes as Prime Minister to that crucial council on Thursday the 17th of October. I think it's very sad that MPs have voted like this, but if I am still Prime Minister, I do. I think it's a great dereliction of their democratic duty, Mr. Speaker. But if I'm still Prime Minister after Tuesday the 15th of October, then we will leave on the 31st of October with, I hope, a much better deal. The Leader of the Opposition now has a question to answer. He has demanded an election for 2 years while blocking Brexit. He said only 2 days ago that he would support an election. And now, Parliament having passed a bill that destroys the ability of government to negotiate, is he now going to say that the public cannot be allowed an election to decide which of us sorts out this mess? I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. The country doesn't want an election. But this House has left no other option than letting the public decide who they want as Prime Minister, and I commend this motion to the House.
Well, of course, that's British Prime Minister Boris Johnson there. Not too happy after he lost the vote again, essentially meaning that he must pursue a deal on a Brexit going forward. Of course, him talking about a general election as well. Well, moving on now, let's take a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. South Africa's rand breaking through the 15 rand per dollar handle for the first time in almost a month. It was lifted by positive local economic news as well as positive developments related to protests in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling weakening against the dollar, traders say due to excess liquidity in local money markets and increased dollar demand from oil importers. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.